There are some things I'll take a chance on, but life is already enough of a gamble for me to put my whole nest egg in the share market. So I take a calmer path. By investing in private credit, I know my money could be growing, not yo-yoing.
From Barangaroo Studios, the AusBiz COB is the key stuff you need to know about the day in business and finance.
Good Monday afternoon. Welcome to the COB. I'm Nadine Blaney. Great to be here with you to round out this first trading day of the brand new trading week and all of the promise that it holds. And we saw a bit of a dip upon the open. I was on air as that happened, and then steadily the market started to climb till we hit about noon, and then a little bit of a pullback, but you can see there looks to be closing round about the highs of the day. That's the COB Australia Index, up by about 0.3%. The S&P ASX 200 continuing to flirt with those all-time record highs. 8,963 is where we sit while the last of the day's trades roll through the market. We'll get you updated on that in a little bit. After we get you across all the news that's out there today. I will say that U.S. futures are mildly positive at this time. So records yet again within our reach. It's been quite the run for this local market. Is there a bit of nervousness creeping in? Not so. If you take a look at these results, most of which, well, they're coming fast and furious now, but it's been so far so good. At least that's the consensus when I've been speaking with my guests about reporting season thus far. Now, well, a cherry on top, would be if we could see lasting peace in Ukraine. We do have European leaders and the Ukrainian President Zelensky making their way to Washington to meet with the U.S. President Donald Trump in hopes of some sort of an agreement to end that brutal war that has been going on for too long. All right, let's take a look at some of the sectors today. Outperforming being those telcos, including Telstra, up by 1%. Aussie Broadband up by close to 1%. I note that Superloop is reporting later in the week. I think, just going by memory, it's Thursday, and we will be speaking with the CEO. At the banks, we had a quarterly update coming from NAB today, really sending shares higher. So ignoring the fact that it's paying out $130 million because it was underpaying its people. But ANZ is the exception to the rule there. We haven't heard an update from ANZ yet, but we will do so later this week. The miners have been a bit of a troubled spot for this local market. If it weren't for Rio and BHP and the like being down, significantly, actually, we would have had a better day. Disappointing data out of China. We will be speaking with BHP's CFO on the day results are released. I think that's Wednesday. So we'd love for you to join us for that, to get the latest right from the coalface. And energy. We watched oil prices come under pressure, although ahead of its result, Woodside is up by about 0.3%. Beach Energy was featured on the call today. Wasn't getting a lot of love. You'll have to listen to that episode to hear what my guests, David Lane from Ords and Zach Riaz from Banyan Tree, had to say about Beach. NAB, as I mentioned, out with a quarterly update today, expects operating expenses to be 4.5% higher, largely because of that $130 million remediation cost that it will be forced to pay underpaid staff. Ampol's net profit dropped 23% in the first half. Shares, though, up 26 cents to $29.31. BlueScope has seen its full-year profit tumble to $84 million, compared with $806 million a year ago, which it puts down to softer cyclical conditions, tariff uncertainty, and that write-down in the U.S. Shares off by close to 3% to $23.49. Horizon, the share buyback did impress shareholders. Underlying earnings fell, though, 48% to $1.57 billion, which was in line with its guidance released in June. Lendlease, returning to profit, says that FY26, though, will be a year of transition. It was the stock of the day. I'll bring you analysis in just a tick. Elsewhere, Omedia posted a 46% jump in first half profit, but the outlook a bit dicey. Shares are down by close to 11%. A2 Milk shares up by 2.6 to $8.19 after reporting a 21% jump in profit. Shareholders will see a 20 Kiwi cent per share dividend. And Digico Infrastructure REIT fell on an annual earnings miss. We've got EVT climbing to a record high on a Pro-Invest Hotels acquisition, and Iris rose on confirming talks with potential buyers. Back to results, though, New Hope fell on lower full-year earnings. Amero fell with its full-year loss widening. Fiducian Group, we spoke with Indy Singh, the CEO and founder. It actually hit a record high on strong full-year results. GPT Group as well, hitting an over 3.5-year high on upbeat half-yearly results. And back to M&A, check it out. APM Animal Health climbed to a near 3-year high. Shares up by more than 48% on a takeover offer. It's long been touted as a takeover target. So we'll see what happens on that front. Let's find out what's driving markets. Welcome to the COB. It's a Monday. Josh Gilbert from eToro. Hey, Josh, nice to see you. What do you make of this market performance today?
Yeah, good afternoon, Nadine. Look, I think it was, again, we're being driven by sort of earnings season, of course, at the moment. So far, so good. I think you mentioned that at the top of the episode there. Look, I think we're obviously maybe getting a little bit of, caution as well coming into sort of this week. It's quite a big week, macro, heavy from a US standpoint. We've obviously got the Jackson Hole Symposium coming at the end of the week. We've got sort of US Fed minutes. We've also got, a fair bit of geopolitical tension sort of really at the head. We've got Ukraine, Russia, US sort of all in talks as well. But, locally being obviously driven by those sort of earnings results coming through, yet to probably get the big names that we're expecting through this week. Obviously NAB out today, but BHP, CSL, etc. coming through, a little bit later in the week, which will be, a couple of key drivers there. But yeah, overall, so far, so good, I would say, from that sort of reporting season, from what we're seeing. So I think you could sort of take that positivity into this week.
Okay, so we'll take that positivity. What happens if we do see some sort of a resolution on the war front? And I know it sounds blunt and probably a bit crass, but will it be sort of a big impulse taken off markets or not so much?
I think it's a risk that sort of has sort of been hovering in the background a little bit for markets. I feel as if what we're seeing with geopolitical tensions has kind of become the new normal for investors. They're sort of taking it in its stride. News headlines coming through have had less of an effect on markets in recent years than they probably did maybe 3-4 years ago. So I think that's something to sort of really take into consideration. However, we are sat at record highs for pretty much most assets, right? Bitcoin trading near all-time highs, risk assets, NASDAQ at all-time highs, the ASX, pretty close to it as well. So it kind of feels as if, the market may not need much of an excuse to sort of have maybe a bit of a pullback. So if we do see things go potentially the wrong way, then that is something that I think could, ultimately cause a bit of disruption to markets if, those negotiations or, talks or whatever sort of break down and we sort of maybe take one step backwards. So I think that is a risk to markets this week, as well as, as I say, from the standpoint of what we hear from Jerome Powell later on in the week, it does feel like we've probably got a few risk events to sort of really try and take on this week.
So Jerome Powell's not expected to give any indication when it comes to the likely path for rate cuts, is he? Because there, obviously is a bit of concern about stagflation in the United States right now.
Yeah, I mean, look, it was an interesting week last week. We had that inflation number that sort of came in earlier in the week that basically solidified the expectation that we're going to get a rate cut in September. Core inflation picked up slightly, headline came in on expectations, but then you had that PPI number that was much higher, sort of really showing the sort of tariffs sort of feeding through into that figure there, and rate cut expectations have pulled back quite a bit. We've gone from 100% expectation of a cut to around about 80% now. So there is that sort of slight worry into this week. Again, yes, when we hear from Jerome Powell, the Jackson Hole, he's probably not going to give too much away. Last time he spoke, he sort of said that the US economy was sort of moving in the right direction for a rate cut. Whether he sort of leans into that this week, I'm not sure he will. But look, we're going to be sort of listening to that idea of the sort of framework in terms of policy, the strategy that it's going to use to obviously bring down inflation. And especially, I think we're going to want to hear a lot about employment, right? Because at the start of the month, we had that pretty weak jobs number, those revised jobs numbers as well, coming in pretty weak as well. So whether we get hints about what the Fed's thinking, ahead of that September meeting will be interesting. Not sure we'll get too much from him, but also we want to hear about how those tariffs are ultimately impacting the economy. I think that will be sort of right at the top of the list.
Pretty quiet as far as economic data here locally, though. I mean, it felt like last week was a big one. Wages, jobs, and the RBA. A couple of speeches from RBA officials, but yeah, I mean, is there anything to watch out for on the data front here locally?
I think there's maybe a couple of things. We've got consumer confidence coming through. That might be something to sort of watch. I mean, it's usually a good read, and especially when we're in the sort of the midst of, reporting season as well, and we'll have retail numbers coming through. I think that the expectation now is that we're probably going to see, maybe a bit of a pickup in that consumer confidence. We had that rate cut last week, and then there's obviously this expectation that we may continue to see rate cuts continue, given that the market's now pricing in a couple cuts for the rest of the year. So I think that's what we're looking at. But having said that, confidence in the US dipped on Friday as well. So whether that feeds back into sort of what we're seeing locally, we'll have to sort of wait and see. But I think, we're probably likely to see a bit of a pickup from where we have been recently, given that we had that rate cut coming through. And as I say, the expectation that we're going to get more cuts coming is probably going to sort of lean into that data. I mean, across Asia as well, we've got the Bank of Japan. We've got inflation numbers out of Japan, which should give us a bit of a read into what we're going to expect from the Bank of Japan for the rest of the year, if they're going to sort of hike rates further there. And then we also get some sort of loan data out of China as well, which will be pretty interesting, seeming we're expecting to sort of hopefully get some more stimulus coming from China over this year as well, especially on the sort of the light of those potential tariffs coming through. So that's something that we're going to keep an eye on pretty closely. And I think outside of that as well, just in China, we have Alibaba's earnings as well. So that'll be something that we keep an eye on, because we've seen obviously huge performance from Chinese stocks. Particularly this year, Alibaba has sort of stepped up after many years of underperformance. Shares up over 50% so far this year, and they're sort of moving pretty heavily into sort of AI, but its sort of valuation maybe isn't sort of anywhere close to sort of what we're seeing from some of those US tech peers, and it's sort of obviously trading on that expectation of the risk of ultimately just being a Chinese stock. So be interesting to see if they are monetizing AI like those sort of US tech giants, and if they are, we might see more good news for a stock that's really underperformed against global tech peers over the last few years.
Mm-hmm. Now we're pretty much through quarterly earnings season in the US. Are there any kind of laggards that we'll be interested to check in on?
Yeah, look, I think that, earnings seasons, particularly from tech, has been positive. That AI trade has been, something that we've narrowed in on, more than ever in this earnings season. If we think about those sort of big tech names and sort of what they've, released in terms of monetization to the bottom line, and also, that CapEx coming through, that's sort of been something that we've looked at pretty closely. And also house builders is one that have been laggards for a long period over in the US, but have sort of really come through and shone this earnings season. So that's sort of been a sector in the US that we think has sort of really stood out after, a period of struggle. That we still do have Nvidia to sort of really come through. We've usually seen Nvidia as the name that maybe can come through to either maybe save an earnings season or just sort of really confirm that sort of bias of the AI trade. Luckily this time it doesn't need to be sort of saving the day so much, but that will be on us either next week or the week after, but I'm pretty sure it's next week. So that should just wrap up what is a pretty strong earnings season. If we think about what we've seen from those big tech names so far, that should lead into a pretty solid result for Nvidia. So we think so far so good, and as I say, Nvidia just to sort of confirm that next week hopefully.
Okay, great. Well, look, we get Lowe's this week, we get Home Depot in the States, so a little bit of a look into the state of the US consumer. Hey Josh, thanks for joining us. Always appreciate your insights. Take care.
Thanks, Nadine. Have a great week.
Joining us from eToro. And I mentioned that I chatted with Zach Riaz and David Lane about the stock of the day, which is Lendlease. Here's some of what they had to say.
By the sheer definition of a transition year, you'd suspect there is execution risk to it. But capital management been announced, a bunch of positive signs around, turnaround in net profit. But yeah, we're happy to still sit on this on the sidelines, given that even next year you still expect gearing to reduce. And so if all that starts to line up, you will start to see this stock to trickle higher. But it is a competitive space.
Some positive signs coming from Lendlease, and it does feel like it's almost the first positive news that we've had for 5 years or so. And it does show that management are executing on that strategy that they put in place 12 or 18 months ago to reshape the business. They've sold off a lot of their developments and their non-core businesses and focusing very much on the property development side. So yeah, it is a positive in the short term, but I don't think it's a positive enough to want me to jump into the stock.
So you can listen to the extended stock of the day analysis via our website, ausbiz.com.au. I know some of you will be watching on the website as we speak, but others will be listening to this in podcast form. Okay, let's take a look at some of the leaders and laggards in this market. Clarity Pharmaceuticals, it is just up there, and I'm not quite sure why. I can't see any news associated with it, but it is quite volatile. Liontown Resources has seen its price target lifted 9.5%. By Bell Potter Lendlease, there's the stock of the day, putting on a solid 5.65% to $5.89. REA Group has a new CEO, Cameron McIntyre, so coming from Car Group over to REA. And Neuron Pharmaceuticals gaining again, up by close to 4% to $17.01. Now, some of the laggards in relation to reporting season is Digico. So that put out a disappointing update today. Temple & Webster, look, it is reported well. Nobody's taking it away from that or that away from it. But look, it's very expensive, shedding 5.7%. UBS calling it really hard to justify its valuation here at $23.66. New Hope, I mentioned, it reported and it's fallen. Cochlear, in the wake of last week's result, we spoke with Dig Howitt, the CEO, on Friday afternoon. If you've missed that, you can take a little listen on the website, and HMC Capital amongst those laggards as well. So small to mid-cap space leading the market, Beacon Minerals up by 32%. There's also a small resources company called Kali, I think, Kaili Resources, and it absolutely surged after getting approval to start digging for rare earths in South Australia. Some of the underperformers, let's call it that. AML3D is down by close to 11% to 29 cents per share. Vinyl shedding 9% to 9 cents per share. So tonight we get trade balance out of the EU. We get the housing market index out of the US, and the housing market there has been suffering. So it'll be interesting to see if home builder sentiment lifts at all. Tomorrow, as Josh flagged, rightly so, we get that monthly consumer confidence index. We also hear from the head of payments and policy, Ellis Connolly. We also get earnings. I was wrong. I'm sorry. BHP is tomorrow. Tomorrow we will be speaking with the CFO. BHP, CSL, Woodside, James Hardie, Seek, and Hub24 will also be joined by Andrew Alcock, who is Hub24's CEO. Alrighty, let's see what the final figure is for the S&P ASX 200, up by, well, pretty close to 0.25%, 959, let's call it 960. That's a record reset. We've got Asian markets in China, mainland Chinese markets looking all right, as well as the Hang Seng. And E-minis still mildly positive. So there's a lot on the agenda in terms of geopolitics tonight. We'll see what comes from that meeting between the US president and the Ukrainian president as well. We want some sort of a deal on Russia. We'll be, thinking about Jackson Hole and what Powell will likely say there. And just keeping our eye on markets. Will it be another record night for markets in the US? We will see. If you've missed anything throughout the day, we have a whole host of great CEO interviews, reporting season analysis. You can find it all online throughout ausbiz.com.au. I hope you have a good night. We'll see you tomorrow morning.
The COB is brought to you by Montgomery Investment Management. The world is volatile. Your financial future doesn't have to be. Find out more at montinvest.com.